The price of PC parts seems to be changing all the time, and with a seemingly endless number of new GPU releases, the best builds you can assemble right now are so much different to what you could build just a few months ago. So what are the best systems? Well, I'm going to walk you through 3 of the best systems you can build right now for some of the most common price points. Let's do this. Take your build to the next level with APACE's sleek RGB DDR5 memory. Available with a wide range of speeds and capacities, the APACER Panther lineup has a kit for everyone. A great looking aluminium alloy heatsink offers excellent heat dissipation, while Intel XMP 3.0 and AMD Expo certification means this RAM is a great fit for Team Red and Team Blue systems. Plus, RGB support in Asus, Gigabyte, MSI and ASRock software suites makes this an easy addition to any build. Learn more at the first link in the description below. I'm going to be using Newegg to pick the parts for these builds just to get a realistic, up-to-date idea of pricing. Also, it means if you're willing to shop around, you can trim a bit more money out and save yourself a bit of cash in the process too. Now, I'm going to start with a build for sub $1,000. I want to hit that $900 mark at the absolute maximum. Now, to do that, I want to get a good CPU and GPU combo to start off. Get these 2 components right, and there's a much higher chance that your build is going to be successful and perform as expected. Now, as far as budget CPUs goes, the 12400F springs to mind as probably one of the best options. You can see here right now at $144 with an extra $16 using the promo code. It's a really great value chip, coming in around $128. Now, that isn't necessarily going to be the only option for this build. We could also go ahead and look at something like the Ryzen 5 5600X, probably the closest rival from AMD. But you can see here we're looking 175 or even 159 best case scenario. The 12400F is also a little bit of a better chip than the 5600X, so I think I'm going to head for the 12400F in this build. If we're going to allocate roughly 50% of the build budget to the CPU and the graphics card, that's going to give us around another $300 or so to play with when it comes to the GPU. But let's save that for later. The reason being, now we've got the CPU, we know what motherboard we need. So we want a B760 or a B660 design. This is the cheaper chipset, and it's going to give us better value for money while still supporting things like RAM overclocking. Now, B760 is the slightly newer chipset, which I would prefer. Something like this ASRock board is a great shout, and if you go for DDR4 memory, you can save yourself a bit more cash. I'd rather DDR5, but for a budget build, DDR4 is going to be the best option. Now, I don't really want to spend too much money here. Something like the ASRock B760M Pro RS is an awesome shout. We've used the A620 and B650 versions of this board and been impressed, so this B761 is certainly going to be a good option for this build. It also supports DDR5 memory, which I personally would prefer. I think 32 gigabytes is the sweet spot nowadays. 16 gigs might be enough for this build, but you're kind of cutting it fine. Again, I want to look at the best selling options, but I don't really want to spend a huge amount. This Corsair kit, for example, is just too expensive. I also want to keep cache latency down, so I'm going to filter by kits with a cache latency of 31 to 40. We want 16 gigs per module, DDR5, and we're going to apply all of these settings. The lowest price kit I can find really is this T-Force Vulcan. That's coming in at 87, so let's add that for now, but just check we're not making a mistake with DDR5 memory. A good way to do this would just be to look at the price of 32 gigabytes of DDR4. As I say, that newer memory would be preferable, and DDR4, while saving us a little bit of money, doesn't look like it's going to move the needle too far with this system. Now, of course, for the 12400F, you don't technically need to buy a CPU cooler, as it comes with an included stock cooler, which will be perfectly sufficient. However, the fans on stock coolers are small, meaning they have to spin fast to keep the CPU under temperature, which can be quite loud. So instead, I'm going to look for a CPU tower air cooler. We don't need a liquid cooler, certainly not. There's no overclocking in this build, and we don't want to spend a great deal of cash. Now, you can see here there's loads of options already for some really quite reasonable price points. Again, let's look at our best selling options, and let's filter that price down so we're not spending any more than about $45. That should be perfectly sufficient to get us a good cooler. DeepCool have got their AG400, which I imagine is a cheaper version of their WoW-reviewed AK400 for $29. And you've also got this Johnsbro cooler for $39, which is going to cost us that little bit more. I think I'm going to go for the AG400 in black. It's basic, it's simple, but we get the RGB fan for a bit of flair, and at $29, you really can't go too far wrong. Now, looking at the basket so far, we have a CPU, motherboard, RAM, and cooler. We do need some sort of storage next, so again, we can tick that off. For a build like this, I'm hoping a 1TB NVMe is going to be the solution, but I'm not convinced we've got the budget headroom to make it happen. Again, I'm going to use the filters to my advantage here. I want a 1TB drive in a standard M.2 form factor, and I'd like it to be PCI Generation 4 if possible. I'm then again going to search for the best selling items and see where we're at. We don't really want to be spending spending $90 to be totally honest with you, so I'm going to set our maximum price to about the $80 mark and see what we can find. Crucial's P3 Plus comes away straight away as a great example. Again, we've used this drive in a number of builds, check those out in the cards now, and been pretty happy. It is on back order for just a few more days, but that's okay. We can add that to the cart as certainly the best value option. Now, looking at that $900 budget, and it is escaping us quite rapidly, we've got around about 450 left to play with. Next, we need a power supply. For a build like this, a 650 watt unit is going to be totally fine. I'm saving the GPU till last so that I can tick off as many parts as possible and see how much money remains. Something quite cheap like this MSI MAG A650BN will be fine. It's not the most glamorous unit in the world, and by the looks of things, it's not modular either. However, this is a budget build and compromise is important. It's reputable, got really good reviews, and has enough wattage. For me, that's enough to get it into the basket. That then leaves us with just the case and the graphics card left to pick. Again, we can look at the best-selling options. I would naturally gravitate towards something from Montech or Corsair's new budget-oriented 3000D. But I do want to look at what the most popular options are at this price point. So let's again set to best-selling and limit ourselves to a maximum of, let's call it $90. I don't want to spend that much, but there might be discount codes and stuff that will knock us more money off. Again, Montech, most popular. We've used this case, been very, very impressed with it. And it's Micro-ATX, meaning our smaller M-ATX board won't look silly and out of place. There won't be any spare gaps that look disproportionate. Plus, at $59, it's going to give us the most headroom available for the GPU. And I think unless I've made a massive mistake, all that's left is the graphics card to go. Got the CPU, motherboard, case, power supply, and we have, roughly speaking, $320 remaining for the GPU. At this price point, we have a few options. Nvidia's RTX 4060 is going to come in around about $299. It's an okay card for 1080p gaming, but I don't believe it to be particularly good value for money. And it would be safe to say it didn't review very well when I first featured this card in a video and an article on our site a few months ago. The better option, I think, would be something like AMD's RX 7600. You can get the base model RX 7600 for as low as $259. That is well in budget. In fact, that's going to put us close to $800 to $900. Well, they do a 16GB version for about $329, something that would be perfectly placed for this build. Now, the VRAM on the 7600 at 8GB, while not amazing, is sufficient for 1080p gaming. The only other option really, I suppose, you have at this price point would be the RTX 3060. This is a last generation GPU, but has 12GB of video memory and is going to come in around about the $200 to $300 mark. I actually think the 3060 makes sense if you want the extra VRAM, but the RX 7600 is undoubtedly going to give you more straight rasterization performance. Just take a look at our benchmarks. Personally, I think the 7600 is the better option, but I know you guys will want the extra VRAM, and at $300, the 3060 is definitely not a bad card. The only other option really that probably would be viable would be a 6750 XT. That's coming in at $350, so that is going to push over the budget, I would imagine, in this build. Let's add it in just to check. See what happens when we take the 3060 out. Again, $930. So a few options. I'll link all the parts of this build. The 3060 is good if you want NVIDIA and more VRAM. The 7600 is going to give you the most performance, while the 6750 XT is worth considering too. Personally, I would go for the 7600. But what if you've got a bit more money to spend? You want to spend about $1,200 on your build. That's going to give us an extra $300 or so to play with, and believe you me, that opens up a lot of options. So much so, I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to empty the basket and kick us off with that $1,200 build from new. As far as CPU options go, the Ryzen 5 7600X springs out to me as probably one of the best options. That's $229, so let's compare that against some of our Intel finds. Intel's new 14400F is also worth considering. That comes in cheaper at $209 plus $5 off, so I like the look of that. While AMD's 7600 Non-X is also a plausible option at this price point. That's going to come in at $209, but is out of stock. Based on our comparison then, I'm going to suggest the 14400F to be the best option. Just over $200 is really, really not too bad, and it actually allows us to stick with our B760M ASRock motherboard from the previous build. It's been a while since Intel have been really competitive at this price point, and it's great to see. Now, the board we used before was good, but I'd like something with Wi-Fi. So again, I'm going to go down to some of our filters and enable the wireless LAN option. We want a board that has that Wi-Fi connectivity. Opening up the spread a little bit, and Gigabyte's B760M DS3H AX is a board that comes up time and time again. Now, to be clear, it's not the best motherboard in the world, and it's certainly not the most attractive design either. You can definitely get a board board that looks better than this. But I want to maximize performance at $1,200, and in our testing, it will be sufficient for this system. It is also DDR5, meaning we can go again for 32 gigs of DDR5 memory. Maybe we got a bit more money to spend this time, so a CL36 kit I think is probably going to be the one that I'd like to go for, with a speed of around about 6,000 megahertz to boot. Now, cheapest options here are G.SKILL's Ripjaws at 91. That's a really, really good deal. Maybe we want something with a bit more RGB, a bit more of an aesthetic edge. Corsair Vengeance at 112. G.SKILL Trident Z5 at 114. I think the Corsair kit makes the most sense. One of the reasons I always recommend Corsair kits is that we have the least problems with them when it comes to actually booting new systems. And if it's your first build, you're much more likely that this is going to do you well than some of the other kits on the market in our testing. Again, a CPU air cooler is all we need for this build. No overclocking on the 14400F. So I'm going to search once again for CPU air cooler. Looking at the best selling options, it's always a good way to guide your thinking. AK620 is awesome, but way overkill for this build. We do not need to spend anywhere near that kind of money. The same goes for this Be Quiet cooler. It can support up to 270 watt CPUs. The 14400F has a TDP of just 65 watts. We definitely don't need a CPU cooler that's quite that powerful. Again, let's set that maximum budget to around about $50, see how that lines up. I can be tempted by DeepCool's AK400 performance, as I do really, really like the cooler, but it's nice to see Cooler Master be a bit more competitive. Their Hyper 212 has been overpriced for a long, long time, and I'm glad to see it's got a lot better. It's also only back ordered for 1 or 2 more days from the point we're filming this video, so by the time you see it, it should be in stock. Again, SSD can be next. We want a 1TB NVMe. I'm just trying to tick off as many parts as possible to see what kind of headroom we have left for the GPU at the end. Again, let's look for those best-selling options and go a little bit higher end with the drive. WD's Black SN850X is another drive we've had really good experiences with, and at $90, it's not a bad deal. This is going to give you top-of-the-range Gen 4 performance. We're talking 7 gigabytes a second on the read and the write. It's incredibly impressive. Looking at our budget, then, we're sitting around about the $580 mark. That gives us, with our $1,200 budget, just over $600 left. Again, we need a power supply, case, and a graphics card. I may actually consider again Corsair's new 3000D for this build. We've got a bit more headroom to play with, but it does depend on the kind of offers they've got available at the moment. Now, as much as I like this case, it's a shame to see that it's gone up in price recently. In a video previously, we found this for significantly cheaper, even with those RGB fans. So I think, unfortunately, well, nice, it's a bit out of the budget today. Let's go back and look at computer cases though, look at those best-selling options, and once again, try and limit ourselves to no more than around about $90. The Montech Air 903 is a sensational PC case, but it has one massive problem. It's way too big. We've got a Micro-ATX board, small form factor system. It's just not really going to work. The Fractal Design Pop Air Mini, on the other hand, that is exactly what I'm looking for. Micro-ATX, RGB fans included, and loads of mesh. It's really, really cool. You even get like a hidden drawer at the bottom of the case. I don't know why Fractal have done that, but I suppose it's kind of novel. Only thing this case is not as good at is that water cooling support. You've got a harder time fitting larger rads, but we don't exactly need it in this build anyway. Once again, I think 650 watts for the power supply will be enough for now. I'm tempted to go higher end here, something like Corsair's CX650M with a modular interface. But again, it's worth considering some of the other options at the price bracket too. MSI, I don't know what they're doing, $100 for that, absolutely no way. I think Corsair win out, $79. Good to see PSU prices come down just a little bit. That then leaves us with $450 left for the graphics card. And this is where things get really interesting. Now on the Nvidia side, there just isn't really very much for $400 or $450. Let's take a look at, say, the RTX 4070. Now that's dropped in price with the release of the supercards. The lowest price one on Newegg right now comes in at $529. It's getting better, but it's still too expensive. The only other Nvidia option is the 4060 Ti 16 gig, which I would recommend nobody buys, so we're not going to include one of those. Giving us really only AMD left with a card in the fight at this price point, the 7700 XT. Now let's take a look at, again, some of the lowest price ones. Cheapest isn't necessarily best, but it's worth considering from price down to price up. This Sapphire Pulse card is fantastic. We actually reviewed this exact model on the website and have featured it in a few builds and been very impressed with it. It's only 2 fans, its aesthetic's not quite as interesting, but we know it has proven performance, and that's really all that matters. At $420 as well, it's going to allow us, by the looks of things, to come in quite easily in budget. So let's proceed to checkout and see where we land. We're sitting then at just $1,178. 20 $22 in budget. Hooray! If I was gonna look at any weaknesses for this build, I'd say the motherboard could definitely be a little bit more beefy, and you may want to go for a slightly better CPU cooler if you want lower temperatures and that aesthetic edge. Otherwise though, this is all very, very good, and for the price, you really can't go too far wrong. But what if you've got more money to spend? James, I want to spend $1,500. How would you do it? Now, anything above $1,500, it's more a case of upgrading the GPU. Once you get to that $1,500 mark, you tend to have a really good base from which you can actually upgrade and build off. Now, CPU-wise, the 7600X Ryzen chip would probably be the one I would default to. It would be nice if we could top up to a Ryzen 7, but that's going to set us back another $100. While Intel's 14600K is going to be how much more? 229? Yeah, again, we're over that $300 price point. Let's add the 7600X in for now. Pick ourselves up a nice B650 motherboard. Gigabyte's B650 Eagle is going to do the job with Wi-Fi included. Nice to see. 32 gigabytes of CL36 6000 MHz DDR5 RAM. I'm going to mix things up this time with G.SKILL's Trident Z5 kit, while the 1TB SN850X used in the last build is going to be more than sufficient. Again, you really don't need much more speed than this, and for $89 without the heatsink, it's going to do the job. We already have heatsinks on the board, so don't worry about cooling either. A 750 watt power supply is going to be more than adequate for the kind of parts in this build, and Thermaltake Smart BM3 is superb. Again, another power supply we've used copiously in videos on the channel that goes in the cart with no hesitation. As far as CPU coolers go, this DeepCool LS520 SE is actually a great value choice. It's not the best 240mm in the world, but for 89 minus 15, so $74.99, it's going to provide much quieter and much more efficient cooling than any air cooler you can get for that $50 price point. The case you go for is always going to be a bit of a personal choice, but I really like NZXT's black H5 Flow. You will need to pick up a couple of aftermarket RGB fans, but for a build like this, the cool little GPU air duct and sleek aesthetic makes it a really premium chassis at a price that won't break the bank. That then gives us around about $600 give or take left for the graphics card, and for that kind of price point, we can do a lot. The first option that springs to mind would of course be the RTX 4070 Super. That retails for around about $599 at MSRP. You can see some cards are actually slightly cheaper than this, while some cards are more expensive. This is going to give you great 1440p performance, good ray tracing, NVIDIA's DLSS 3, which is way better than what AMD have got to offer at the price point. And for those of you looking for a great NVIDIA solution, the 4070 Super fits in the budget and makes a lot of sense. The RX 7800 XT from AMD still holds its own though. You get 16 gigs of VRAM rather than 12. You get better rasterization performance, but there is worse ray tracing and DLSS equivalent features. You also have a wide range of options from AMD, from RGB cards, from power color to this Asus TUF design. Loads and loads of choices for between that $499 and $599 price point. The 7900 GRE though is potentially one of the most interesting options that we haven't had until when it came out a few weeks ago. This is basically a 7800 XT Plus is the way that I would look at it, despite taking the name of the 7900. You get 16 gigs of video memory, good rasterization performance, and a card that competes really well for less money with the 4070 Super. To me, I would suggest going either the 7900 GRE, this Gigabyte card's a great choice, or going for that 4070 Super, depending on whether you want NVIDIA or AMD. Personally, at this price point, I do like some of those NVIDIA exclusive features, but I appreciate for raw performance, AMD is gonna give you slightly better value for money. That then should give us a really nice $1,500 build. We're sitting at $1,389. I've accidentally come in really under budget. The budget savings coming from a $20 combo saving on the motherboard and CPU, $5 combo saving on the power supply, a $5 combo saving on the RAM, obviously a discount on the cooler, and a really competitively priced M.2 SSD. Obviously, you could upgrade even further, look at something like the 4070 Ti Super, or on AMD's side, the RX 7900 XT. But I think for that well below $1,500, this is a great option. Maybe even a CPU upgrade. What do you think of my builds for March and April 2024? Will you be assembling any? Do you agree with them, or think I got one wrong? Let me know in the comments down below. To see more from me, get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.